5 years of silence. That was the price of survival. For Sophie Thorne, every day was a calculated performance. Wear the baggy clothes, scrub the tables. Her head down, never ever let them see the fear in her eyes. She thought the forgotten mountain town of Sutter's Creek was far enough from the Blackwood compound to keep her secrets buried. She was wrong. Because you can change your name, you can dye your hair, and you can live among strangers like a ghost. But you cannot hide a child with Kieran Blackwood's eyes from the man who broke you. The grease trap at the back of Sue's 24-hour diner always smelled worse when it rained. It was a thick, clinging scent that stuck to the back of the throat. But for Sophie, it was the perfume of safety. It smelled like poverty. It smelled like human indifference. It smelled like a place no one from the Blackwood dynasty would ever deign to visit. Sophie wiped the counter with a rag that had seen better days. Her knuckles were raw and red from the bleach water. The clock above the pie display read 11:42 at night. Outside, the storm was battering the tin roof of the diner, drowning out the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional cough from the back kitchen. "Hey, Sophie," a voice rasped from the kitchen window. It was Marn, the night cook, a woman in her 60s with a smoker's cough and a heart of gold. "You look like you're about to drop. Go home. I can close up the front." Sophie forced a smile, tucking a loose strand of dyed brown hair behind her ear. "I need the overtime, Marn. Rent's due on Tuesday, and the landlord's already threatening to change the lock if I'm late again." "That man's a vulture," Marn grumbled, flipping a burger patty with unnecessary aggression. Sophie didn't answer. She just kept scrubbing. "Vultures I can handle," she thought. "It's the wolves I'm worried about." It had been 5 years since she fled the ashes of her old life. 5 years since the night the West compound burned. 5 years since the night Kieran Blackwood lost everything he didn't know he had. Sophie hadn't been a traitor. She had just been a 21-year-old archivist in the wrong place at the wrong time, hearing things she wasn't meant to hear, seeing things she wasn't meant to see. She touched the scar on her collarbone, hidden beneath the high neck of her uniform. It wasn't a mating mark. There was no such thing in the real world. But it was a reminder of the night Kieran had held her in his arms and promised her safety. 24 hours before his compound burned to the ground with 14 people inside. 24 hours before she realized the man she loved might be the man who ordered their deaths. The bells above the front door chimed. It wasn't a gentle tinkle. It was a violent jangle, as if the door had been shoved open with commanding force. The wind howled into the diner, bringing with it the scent of wet asphalt, pine needles, and something else. Something expensive. Leather and gunmetal and cold authority. Sophie froze. The rag dropped from her hand, landing on the linoleum with a wet plop. The air in the diner changed instantly. The static electricity spiked, making the hair on her arms stand up. It was a pressure, a physical weight that pressed against her chest and made it hard to breathe. She had felt this before. In boardrooms. In hallways. In the bedroom she thought she'd never escape. Alpha energy. Unfiltered. Raw. Terrifyingly potent. She kept her back to the door, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. Don't turn around. Just a traveler. Just a passing businessman. Don't turn around. Table for 4. A deep voice rumbled through the space. It wasn't the voice she feared most, but it was authoritative enough to belong to someone who stood beside that voice. Someone who served that voice. "Sit anywhere you like," Marn called out from the back, oblivious to the predator that had just walked in. Humans were lucky that way. They were blind to the monsters in their midst. Sophie heard the heavy tread of boots on the floor. Military-grade boots. 4 men. She squeezed her eyes shut, counting to 3. She had to turn around. She had to serve them. If she bolted, she'd look suspicious. If she acted like prey, they would chase. That was the first rule of survival. She took a deep breath, inhaling the familiar scents of the diner to mask her panic, and turned. She almost collapsed. Sitting in the corner booth, stripped of his wet trench coat, was the man who had haunted her nightmares for half a decade. Kieran Blackwood. He looked different than the last time she had seen him, through the smoke and chaos of that terrible night. His jaw was sharper, covered in a dark manicured stubble that traced the hard line of his face. His black hair was slicked back from the rain, revealing the jagged scar that ran from his temple into his hairline. A scar that hadn't been there 5 years ago. He was wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than this entire building. The top button of his shirt was undone, revealing the column of his throat and the edge of a tattoo she remembered tracing with her fingers in another life. He was looking down at the menu, his expression one of bored irritation. Beside him sat another man, older, harder, eyes like cold chips of flint. Silas Crow. She recognized him immediately. Kieran's right hand, his most trusted man. The other two were muscle, pure and simple. Young, broad-shouldered hands resting near their waistbands in a way that suggested concealed carry permits. Kieran didn't look up. He didn't sense her. Thank God Sophie thought her knees trembling. The suppressants are working. She had spent every spare dollar on anxiety medication and beta blockers from the black market clinic in the next town over. They made her sick. They made her weak. They dulled her senses. But they masked her panic effectively. To him, she should look like nothing more than a tired waitress with bad diet job and worse prospects. Sophie, Marn hissed. Coffee pot. Sophie jolted. She grabbed the pot of fresh coffee and a stack of ceramic mugs. Just pour the coffee. Take the order. Walk away. She approached the table. Her steps were silent. Old habits died hard. She placed a mug in front of Silas first, then the two younger men. Her hand was steady. She was an excellent actress. Years of fear had made her one. Then she moved to Kieran. As she poured the steaming black liquid into his mug, the storm outside flashed with lightning. The booth was illuminated in stark white light for a split second. Kieran shifted in his seat. His hand, large and scarred across the knuckles, moved across the table to grab the sugar dispenser. His fingers brushed against her wrist. Skin on skin. The reaction was violent. A spark, hot and electric, snapped between them like static discharge on a dry winter day. Sophie gasped, jerking her hand back. The coffee pot wavered dangerously, splashing hot liquid onto the table, missing Kieran's hand by less than an inch. "I'm so sorry," she stammered, her voice dropping an octave, breathless with terror. She grabbed a handful of napkins, diving in to clean the mess before it spread. "I'm so sorry, let me—" Kieran didn't move his hand. He didn't pull away from the scalding coffee pooling near his expensive cuff. He went perfectly still. Slowly, terrifyingly, he lifted his head. His eyes were not entirely human. For a split second, they were something else. Something molten and predatory before settling back into a deep, abyssal hazel that she remembered from 1,000 quiet mornings. He stared at her face. He looked at her cheap polyester uniform, her messy hair, her tired, bloodshot eyes. He didn't recognize her. Not yet. But he felt the spark. "Clumsy?" Silas sneered from across the table. "Watch yourself, girl." "Leave it," Kieran said. His voice was a low growl that vibrated in Sophie's sternum like a tuning fork struck too hard. Sophie froze. The sodden napkin was still clutched in her hand. Kieran caught her wrist. His grip was iron. He wasn't hurting her, but he was holding her captive. He brought her wrist up slowly, bringing it closer to his face. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring slightly. Sophie stopped breathing. The beta blockers covered her panic. The dye covered her hair. The exhaustion covered her youth. But they couldn't cover the chemistry. They couldn't cover the way her pulse hammered against his thumb. They couldn't cover 5 years of longing and terror compressed into a single heartbeat. "What is your name?" Kieran asked. His eyes locked onto hers, searching for something. A flicker of recognition. A crack in the mask. A lie. "Sarah," she lied. It came out smooth because it was close enough to the truth. Close enough to slip past her defenses. "My name is Sarah." Kieran's thumb brushed over her pulse point. It was hammering so hard he could surely count the beats. 120. 130. Climbing. "You're terrified, Sarah," Kieran observed softly. There was no accusation in his tone, just cold clinical assessment. "Why?" Sophie forced herself to meet his eyes. Forced herself to play the part she'd rehearsed 1,000 times in her mirror. "You're huge," she whispered, leaning into the role of the intimidated small-town waitress. "And you have big, scary men with you. And I just spilled coffee on a suit that probably cost more than my car." Silas chuckled darkly from his seat. "She has a point, boss." Kieran didn't laugh. He didn't let go. He stared at her for 3 seconds longer. His gaze traced the line of her cheekbone, the shape of her mouth, the faint scar above her left eyebrow that she'd gotten falling off a swing set when she was 7. He was cataloging her, filing her away, trying to place why she felt familiar. Then abruptly he released her wrist. "Clean it up," he commanded, turning his attention back to the laminated menu. "And bring me a steak. Rare, bloody." Sophie retreated to the kitchen on legs that felt like water. She braced herself against the prep counter, gasping for air, like a drowning woman breaking the surface. "You okay, hun?" Marn asked, eyeing her with concern. "That guy looks like trouble." "I'm fine," Sophie lied, grabbing the steak knife with a trembling hand. "Just tired." She wasn't fine. He was here. And worse, he hadn't just come for food. Men like Kieran Blackwood didn't drive 3.5 hours into the mountains for a midnight steak. He was hunting something, or someone. She had to finish the shift. She had to get home. She had to get to Leo, the little boy waiting for her in the trailer park with Kieran's eyes and her smile, and a future that was about to explode into 1,000 pieces. The steak was cooked perfectly, rare blood pooling at the edges of the plate. Sophie plated it with hands that shook no matter how hard she tried to steady them. Every instinct she possessed was screaming at her to run out the back door, jump in her rusted sedan, and drive until the wheels fell off. But running triggered the chase. If she fled now, Kieran would know she had something to hide. She walked back out to the floor. The diner was empty save for the Blackwood table and an old trucker asleep in the far booth, his head pillowed on his arms. She set the plate down in front of Kieran. He ate with precise, predatory efficiency. He didn't look at her again, but she could feel his awareness like a laser pointer aimed at the back of her neck. She turned to leave. "Tell me, Sarah," Kieran said suddenly, just as she was 3 steps away. He didn't stop cutting his meat. The knife moved through the flesh with surgical precision. "Do you know the woods around here well?" Sophie paused. Every word was a potential trap. "Reasonably well. I grew up a few towns over." "We're looking for someone," Silas interjected, wiping his mouth with a napkin. He leaned back in the booth, his posture deceptively relaxed. "A fugitive. A woman roughly your height, but much prettier." The insult stung, but Sophie used it. She let her shoulders slump, playing the part of the plain, overworked waitress who'd heard worse. "I haven't seen anyone unusual. We don't get many strangers here." "She's been missing for 5 years, Kieran said. He finally looked up. The intensity in his eyes was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness that was somehow more terrifying. "She stole something from me. Something irreplaceable." Sophie's blood ran cold. He knows. No, he couldn't know about Leo. She had left before she even realized she was pregnant. The compound had burned 3 days after her last night with Kieran. She'd taken the pregnancy test in a gas station bathroom 2 states away, her hands shaking so hard she could barely read the result. He must mean the data. She had stolen the archive files, proof of financial discrepancies she'd found buried in the quarterly reports. Transactions that didn't add up. Money moving through shell companies. She copied everything onto a USB drive the night before the fire planning to bring it to Kieran the next morning. She'd never used it, but she still had it, hidden in a shoebox under her bed alongside Leo's birth certificate and $5,000 in cash. "I hope you find her," Sophie said quietly. "Oh, I will," Kieran said. He said it without anger. He said it like a promise, like a fact of nature. The sun rises, the rain falls. Kieran Blackwood finds what he's looking for. "And when I do," he continued, his knife still moving through the meat, "I'm going to get my answers, one way or another." He said it so casually, like he was discussing the weather, like he was ordering another cup of coffee. Sophie nodded and retreated to the counter. She busied herself refilling sugar containers, watching them in the reflection of the glass pie case. They finished eating 20 minutes later. Kieran stood up, buttoning his coat with economical movements. He threw a stack of bills onto the table, enough to cover the meal 10 times over. "Let's go," Kieran ordered. "The scent trail ends near the old lumber mill. We start the sweep there at 0600. Sophie's heart stopped. The lumber mill. That was 2 miles from her trailer park. It was too close. As they walked toward the door, the unthinkable happened. The door burst open and a young woman stumbled in, soaking wet, holding a bundle wrapped in a blanket. It was Lucy, Sophie's 17-year-old neighbor. Sweet kid. Not bright. Painfully, dangerously not bright. "Sophie," Lucy cried out, panic shredding her voice. "Sophie, you have to come. It's Leo. He's burning up, and he's crying for you, and the power went out in the trailer park, and I didn't know what to do." Sophie vaulted over the counter. "Lucy, shut up." But it was too late. At the name Leo, Kieran stopped. His hand was on the door handle. But he froze like a man who'd just heard a ghost speak his name. Lucy ran up to Sophie, oblivious to the 4 large men standing like statues by the exit. "I didn't know what to do, Sophie. He's screaming about his daddy again, and he's doing that thing with his eyes where they look all weird and—" Sophie grabbed Lucy's shoulders, shaking her hard enough to rattle teeth. "Not here, Lucy. Go to the back. Wait for me in the—" "Stop." The single word cracked through the air like a whip. Kieran turned slowly. The air in the diner grew hot, suffocatingly hot. The windows began to rattle in their frames. Something was rising to the surface, something that had been caged for 5 years. He walked back toward them with the controlled grace of an apex predator circling wounded prey. Silas and the two guards fanned out, blocking the exit with their bodies. Who? Kieran asked, his voice soft and dangerous. Is Leo, my son, Sophie said. She stepped in front of Lucy, shielding the girl with her body. She raised her chin, her eyes flashing with defiance. My son is sick. I have to go. Your son, Kieran repeated. He took another step closer. He was 10 feet away, then 8, then 6. He sniffed the air. Lucy had been holding Leo. Leo's scent was all over her rain-soaked jacket. It was a scent hidden by illness and fever and the metallic tang of child sweat. But underneath that, Kieran could smell it. Cedar, ozone, gunpowder, iron, blackwood. His eyes widened. The hazel was consumed entirely by something else. Something primal and possessive and utterly terrifying. His nostrils flared. He looked from Lucy to Sophie, really looked at Sophie this time. He saw past the baggy uniform, past the dyed hair, past the exhaustion and the poverty and the 5 years of careful camouflage. He saw the way she stood, defensive, protective, a mother guarding her cub. He saw the shape of her eyes, the curve of her mouth, the scar above her eyebrow. You, he breathed. The recognition hit him like a physical blow to the chest. Sophie. Run, Lucy, Sophie whispered. No one is running, Kieran snarled. He moved faster than human eyesight should allow. In a heartbeat, he had crossed the diner. He didn't grab Sophie. He grabbed Lucy by the collar of her jacket, lifting her off the ground with one hand. The boy, Kieran roared, his voice shaking the walls hard enough to send the pie case rattling. Where is he? Let her go, Sophie screamed. She didn't think. She reacted. She lunged at Kieran Blackwood like a woman with nothing left to lose. She wasn't trained. She wasn't strong. But she hit him with the force of a desperate mother, slamming into his chest, trying to break his grip on the terrified girl. It was like hitting a brick wall wrapped in expensive wool. Kieran didn't even stumble. He just looked down at her, his face twisted in a mask of fury and confusion, and something that might have been grief. He dropped Lucy. The girl scrambled back, sobbing. Kieran grabbed Sophie by the throat. He slammed her back against the counter, hard enough to send sugar dispensers crashing to the floor in a shower of glass and white crystals. Sophie, he growled. The name tasted like ash in his mouth. You're dead. I saw the report. I saw the DNA. You died in the fire. Sophie clawed at his hand, her legs kicking uselessly. I survived, she choked out. You survived, he hissed, leaning in close. His face was inches from hers. She could see the gold flecks in his eyes, could smell the whiskey on his breath. And you stole a child. He's mine, she yelled, her vision starting to blur at the edges. Who's the father? Kieran demanded. His grip tightened just enough to warn not to kill. Tell me, Sophie, who did you run to after you faked your death? Who fathered a child that smells like my bloodline? Sophie stared into the eyes of the man she had loved, the man she had feared, the man who had haunted every nightmare and every desperate prayer for 5 years. She stopped struggling. She let her hands drop to her sides. You know who, she whispered. Kieran went absolutely still. The silence stretched between them like a chasm opening in the earth. The only sound was the rain hammering against the roof and Lucy's quiet sobbing in the corner. Take them. Take them, Kieran said to Silas, never taking his eyes off Sophie. His voice had dropped to a terrifyingly calm register. Take the girl. Go to the trailer. Get the boy. No, Sophie screamed, struggling again with renewed desperation. Don't you touch him. Silas, don't you dare touch him. If he is born of my blood. Kieran said, his voice like gravel and broken glass. He belongs to me. And if you have hidden my son in a trailer park for 4 years, God help you, Sophie Thorne. He released her throat, only to spin her around and pin her arms behind her back with one hand. He marched her toward the door like a prisoner being led to execution. Where are you taking me? She sobbed, twisting uselessly in his iron grip. Home, Kieran said, to the compound, where you're going to tell me every lie you've spun since the day you supposedly died. And then you're going to tell me the truth. As he shoved her out into the cold, pouring rain, Sophie realized with absolute clarity that the hiding was over. The game had changed. She wasn't fighting for her secret anymore. She was fighting for her son's life. And Kieran Blackwood was no longer looking for a fugitive. He was looking for answers about the son he never knew he had. Rain lashed against the tinted windows of the armored SUV, blurring the passing world into streaks of gray and black. Inside, the silence was louder than the storm. Sophie sat in the back seat, her wrists bound with plastic zip ties that bit into her skin. They weren't the flimsy kind you could buy at a hardware store. These were law enforcement grade, designed to hold men twice her size. The edges cut into her flesh every time she moved. Leo was in the vehicle behind them. She had fought like a wild animal when Silas's men tried to separate them. She had screamed and kicked until one of the guards had pressed his thumb into a pressure point behind her ear and the world had gone gray at the edges. She was awake now, groggy and nauseous, but the separation from her son was a physical ache that made the zip ties feel like nothing. Kieran sat across from her in the rear-facing seat. He hadn't spoken a word since they left the diner parking lot. He was staring at her with those hazel eyes that had dimmed back to something almost human. Almost. He held a glass of whiskey in one hand. The liquid trembled slightly with the vibration of the engine as they climbed higher into the mountains heading back toward Seattle. Back toward the place she'd sworn she would never see again. In the front, the driver navigated the winding mountain roads with professional efficiency. Silas sat in the passenger seat, occasionally glancing back through the rearview mirror with an expression Sophie couldn't read. "You're staring," Sophie whispered. Her voice was hoarse from screaming. "I'm remembering," Kieran corrected. His voice was devoid of warmth, devoid of anything except cold assessment. "I'm remembering a girl who worked in the archives, a girl who was shy and quiet and brilliant, a girl who died in the West Compound fire alongside 13 others." He leaned forward, the expensive fabric of his suit strained across his broad shoulders. "So tell me, Ghost, how does a dead girl end up slinging hash in a roadside diner with a child she claims is mine?" "I never claimed he was yours," Sophie shot back, defiance sparking through her fear. "You assumed." "I don't assume," Kieran growled. He set the whiskey glass down with controlled force. "I observe. I analyze. And that boy in the car behind us smells like my bloodline. The scent is faint because of the fever, but it's there. Cedar and iron and storm. He has the scar behind his right ear, the Blackwood mark that appears in every male of direct descent." He leaned back, his jaw tight. "If he is mine, Sophie, you stole 4 years of his life from me. That is unforgivable." "He was safer in a trailer park than in your compound," she spat. The words came out with more venom than she intended. "Safer than he would be with a father who burns down his own buildings to eliminate problems." Kieran's expression cracked. A flash of genuine confusion crossed his face before the mask slammed back down. "Burns down buildings, is that what you think happened?" "I was there, Kieran." Tears pricked her eyes. She hated herself for the weakness. "I saw the enforcers. I heard the orders. I heard your voice over the comm system saying Code Black West Wing burn protocol activated. But I heard Silas Crow personally give the order to leave no survivors." "My voice can be mimicked," Kieran said. "Borsho." His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "My orders can be forged. I was in Washington, D.C. that night, Sophie. Defense Contractors Gala at the Mayflower Hotel. 200 witnesses. I didn't order the fire. I mourned it." He paused. The muscle in his jaw ticked. "I mourned you." The car turned sharply. Gravel crunched under the reinforced tires. They were passing through iron gates that rose 12 feet high, topped with security cameras and motion sensors. Sophie looked out the window. The massive stone manor loomed against the lightning-streaked sky like something out of a Gothic nightmare. The Blackwood estate. 3 stories of Pacific Northwest timber and stone built by Kieran's grandfather in the 1950s, when the security business was less corporate and more about hired muscle for lumber barons. It looked exactly the same as the night she had fled. Imposing, cold, terrifying. "We're here," the driver announced from the front. As the car came to a halt, the doors were ripped open by guards in tactical gear. Sophie was hauled out into the drizzle. She twisted her body looking frantically for the second vehicle. It pulled up 30 seconds later. 2 guards stepped out. One of them was carrying Leo. Her son was wrapped in a thick emergency blanket, his small face flushed with fever. His eyes closed. He was unconscious against the guard's shoulder, one small hand fisted in the man's tactical vest. "Leo!" Sophie screamed. She lunged forward with everything she had. Kieran caught her by the waist. His arm was like a steel band across her ribs. "He goes to the medical wing. Dr. Elias needs to examine him. The fever is dangerous." "I need to be with him. He doesn't know these people. He'll be scared." "He is unconscious," Kieran said coldly, dragging her toward the main entrance. "And until Dr. Elias confirms his lineage and his health, you are a prisoner, not a mother." "You bastard!" She clawed at his hand, drawing blood with her short nails. Kieran didn't flinch. He marched her through the grand foyer. Staff members froze in the hallways, their eyes wide with shock. She recognized the head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, whose hand flew to her mouth. They all thought they were seeing a ghost. Kieran didn't stop until they reached the east wing, the high security wing. He shoved her into a room that was more gilded cage than cell. It was furnished with a bed and a chair and a small bathroom, but the windows were reinforced glass and the door was heavy steel with a keypad lock. The doctor will assess the boy, Kieran said, standing in the doorway. He filled the frame, completely blocking any hope of escape. If he is mine, he will be treated with the best medical care money can buy. If he is not, if this is some game you're playing with a stolen child, he has your eyes, Sophie whispered. She was defeated. She slumped against the wall, sliding down until she hit the floor. He has your temper. He has your stubborn pride. And he has the Blackwood blood syndrome. Kieran froze. The door handle rattled in his grip. The Blackwood blood syndrome was a genetic clotting disorder specific to the direct Blackwood male line. It made them prone to intense fevers and seizures in early childhood. It was lethal if not managed properly. Kieran himself had nearly died from it at age 3. Only immediate family knew about it. It wasn't in any medical database. It was a secret the family had kept for 3 generations. Is he shifting? Kieran asked. His voice was barely audible. There was no such thing as shifting, but there were medical crises that looked like it to people who didn't understand genetics. He started 2 days ago, Sophie said. Tears were streaming down her face now. His body keeps spiking fevers. He has seizures. The free clinic gave him antibiotics, but they're not working. He needs more than I can give him. He needs his father. The last word broke on a sob. Kieran stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. The anger in his posture seemed to war with something else, something that looked like crushing realization. Stay here, he commanded. Do not move. He slammed the door. The electronic lock clicked with brutal finality. But for the first time in 5 years, Sophie wasn't running. She was waiting, and she was praying that the man she remembered had enough humanity left to save their son. The medical wing of the Blackwood estate was closer to a private hospital than a family clinic. It smelled of antiseptic and ozone and the faint metallic tang of expensive equipment. Kieran stood behind the observation glass, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. On the bed, hooked up to monitors that beeped in a steady rhythm, lay the boy, Leo. Now that the grime of the trailer park had been washed away, the resemblance was undeniable. The boy had the Blackwood jawline strong even at 4 years old, dark hair that would probably turn black like Kieran's. And even in sleep, his brow was furrowed in that same brooding expression Kieran saw in the mirror every morning. The scar behind the right ear was clearly visible now, a small crescent shape pale against the skin, the Blackwood mark. Dr. Elias Crane stepped out of the room, pulling off his latex gloves. He was 72 years old with silver hair and the calm demeanor of a man who'd seen everything. He'd been the Blackwood family physician for 40 years. Well, Kieran demanded, turning sharply, is it sepsis? Is it meningitis? It's the transition, Dr. Crane said quietly. Blackwood blood syndrome. Premature onset. It's rare to see it this young, but not unheard of in your line. Your grandfather had it at age 3. You had it at the same age. Kieran felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered the pain, bones that felt like they were breaking and reshaping, fever that felt like fire in the veins, hallucinations of things that weren't there. His father had held him through it, skin-to-skin contact for 3 days straight until the crisis passed. He's mine, Kieran stated. It wasn't a question anymore. The DNA test is running, Dr. Crane said, but I don't need a machine to tell me what I can see with my own eyes. The boy's a Blackwood, no question. Is he dying? The words came out rougher than Kieran intended. Dr. Crane's expression was grave. Yes, his body is rejecting the syndrome. Without proper intervention, the biological stress will cause organ failure within 72 hours. What do I do? Kieran asked. The ruthlessness was gone from his voice, the cold calculation. In its place was something raw and vulnerable and terrifying. He was the CEO of a $300 million company. He was a decorated combat veteran. He commanded respect with a look and fear with a word. But right now, he was just a man watching a child die. He needs skin-to-skin contact, Dr. Crane explained. He needs your scent and your presence to calm his system. And he needs a blood transfer, a small amount to jumpstart his immune system and link him to the family genetics. It's not magic, Kieran. It's biology. Your blood carries antibodies he needs to survive this. Kieran didn't hesitate. Do it. There is a complication, Dr. Crane added, blocking Kieran's path to the door. The boy is crying out for her in his delirium. The bond between mother and child is one of the strongest forces in biology. If she is distressed, he feels it. If she is absent, his body goes into panic mode. You cannot stabilize him if he is terrified. Kieran's jaw tightened. He wanted to punish Sophie. He wanted to shake the truth out of her. Why she ran, why she hid his son, why she let him live in hell for 5 years thinking he'd killed her. But the beeping of the monitor inside the room sped up. The boy's heart rate was climbing. 120, 130, 140. Bring her, Kieran ordered the guard at the end of the hall. Bring her now. 10 minutes later, the elevator doors opened. Sophie rushed out, flanked by 2 guards. She looked wild, hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed. Her diner uniform was stained and wrinkled. She saw Kieran and stopped. Then she looked through the observation glass and saw Leo. She let out a sound that was half sob, half animal growl. She threw herself at the door. Let me in. Kieran signaled the guards to stand down. He opened the door himself and grabbed her arm, pulling her into the sterile room. Quiet, he hissed. You need to be calm. If you panic, he panics. Understand? Sophie swallowed her hysteria, nodding frantically. She rushed to the bedside, falling to her knees. She took Leo's small hot hand in hers. Baby, she whispered, kissing his knuckles. Mama's here. I'm right here. Leo stirred. His eyelids fluttered. Mama. I'm here, Leo. You're safe. Dr. Crane moved to the other side of the bed. Mr. Blackwood, I need you to roll up your sleeve. We need to do the transfusion now. Sophie looked up, her eyes wide. She watched as Kieran approached the bed. He was so large in the small space, so imposing. He sat on the edge of the bed. He unbuttoned his cuff and rolled up the sleeve of his white dress shirt, revealing a forearm corded with muscle and marked by old scars. Combat scars. This will hurt him, Kieran warned Sophie, his eyes locking with hers. The transfusion. My blood is potent. It burns before it heals. Just save him, Sophie wept. Please, Kieran, just save him. The doctor connected the line. Dark crimson blood flowed from Kieran's arm through the clear tube and into the small IV port in Leo's hand. The effect was instantaneous. Leo arched his back, a high-pitched cry tearing from his throat. His eyes snapped open. They were gold. Pure, shining gold. Kieran's breath hitched. He had seen that look before. In the mirror, during his own childhood crisis. He reached out with his free hand, placing his palm on Leo's forehead. The boy was burning up. 104 degrees at least. Be still, Kieran commanded. Not out loud, but with presence. With the weight of authority that ran in his bloodline. I have you. You are strong. You are a Blackwood. The thrashing stopped. Leo gasped, his small chest heaving. The fever visibly broke. Sweat beaded on his forehead. The gold in his eyes swirled, then settled into a deep, warm hazel. Kieran's hazel. Leo looked at the strange man sitting on his bed. He didn't look afraid. He looked curious, the way only a 4-year-old could be in the middle of a medical crisis. He sniffed the air, smelling the blood, the power, the connection that was forming like a bridge made of fire and DNA. Who are you? Leo croaked. His voice was small and rough. Sophie squeezed Leo's hand, tears streaming down her face. She looked at Kieran, waiting for him to reject the moment, to pull away, to deny it. Kieran didn't pull away. He brushed a damp lock of dark hair off Leo's forehead. His hand, usually an instrument of violence and control, was trembling slightly. I'm your father, Kieran said. The words hung heavy in the room. They altered the molecular structure of the air. They changed the future of everyone in the building. Leo blinked. His child's mind was processing something too big for his vocabulary. Mama said my daddy was a king who got lost in the woods. Kieran's gaze snapped to Sophie. There was a question in his eyes, a softening of the hard edges. She had kept his memory alive, not as a monster, but as a fairy tale. I was lost, Kieran said, his voice rough. He looked back at his son. But I think I've been found. Dr. Crane checked the monitors. Heart rate is stabilizing. Temperature is dropping. The transfusion is working. He'll sleep now. The worst is over. Kieran nodded. He waited until the blood transfer was complete, then stood up. The moment of intimacy shattered like glass as reality rushed back in. He looked at Sophie, who was stroking Leo's hair with shaking hands. She looked exhausted and small, and utterly defeated. Silas, Kieran called out. The COO entered the room instantly, as if he'd been waiting just outside. Stay with the boy, Kieran ordered. Guard him with your life. If anyone comes near this door, stop them. Understood. Understood, boss. Kieran grabbed Sophie's arm, pulling her up from the floor. No, she protested. I'm staying with him. The boy is safe, Kieran said. His voice had turned to steel again. Now you and I are going to finish our conversation. He dragged her out of the room into the hallway and pinned her against the wall with his body. "You have 5 minutes," Kieran growled, looming over her. "Convince me that I shouldn't lock you in the sublevel for the rest of your natural life. Convince me that the woman I mourned for 5 years didn't betray me." Sophie looked up at him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her cold and shaking. But she saw the opening. He was listening. "The order came from your voice," she said. Her voice was shaking but clear. "I was in the communications room. I heard it. Code Black West Wing burn protocol activated. It was your voice, Kieran. I told you my voice can be..." "And the man who executed it was Silas," Sophie interrupted. "I saw him. I watched him pour gasoline on the support beams in the sublevel. I watched him light the match. He saw me. He looked right at me. And he smiled." Kieran froze. He stepped back as if she'd slapped him. "Silas," he repeated. The word came out strangled. "Silas has been my second in command since we were in Delta Force together. He saved my life in Mosul. He pulled me out of a burning Humvee in Kabul." "Then ask yourself," Sophie whispered, "why Silas was the one who suggested you shouldn't waste time looking for me tonight. Why Silas was the one who called me a liar before I even spoke. Why Silas is in that room right now with your son." Kieran turned his head slowly, looking back through the observation glass. Silas was standing over Leo's bed. He wasn't looking at the monitors. He was looking at the sleeping boy with an expression that wasn't protective. It was calculating. "If you're lying," Kieran said, his hand drifting toward the concealed holster at his hip, "I will kill you myself. And if I'm telling the truth," Sophie countered, her voice steady despite the terror, "then you just left your son alone with the monster who tried to kill us both." Glass does not muffle intent. And Kieran Blackwood had not survived 2 tours in combat zones by ignoring his instincts. He stood in the hallway, his hand hovering over his sidearm, watching the man he had called brother for 20 years. Inside the medical room, Silas was no longer standing at attention. He had moved to the head of the bed. His back was to the observation window. His body was blocking the view of the monitors. To a casual observer, he looked like a loyal soldier checking on his commander's son. But Kieran was not a casual observer. He was a man trained to read body language in war zones. And he saw the subtle shift in Silas's posture, the tension in the shoulders, the way his hand slid into his tactical vest, not reaching for a weapon, reaching for something small, something concealed in an interior pocket. "He's going to kill him," Sophie breathed beside him. Her voice was cracking. "Kieran, he's reaching for something." Kieran didn't speak. He didn't waste breath on denial or explanation. He kicked the door open. The steel hinges screamed as the heavy door slammed against the interior wall, hard enough to crack the drywall. Silas spun around. His hand froze halfway to the IV drip. In his fingers was a small, clear vial. The label was turned away, but Kieran knew what it was. He'd seen it before in field operations. Potassium chloride, enough to stop a weakened heart instantly. It would look like natural cardiac arrest brought on by the stress of the syndrome. "Step away from the boy," Kieran said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. It was the voice he used in the field, the voice that preceded violence. Silas didn't panic. That was the most chilling part. He didn't drop the vial. He didn't make excuses. He just smiled, a thin, cruel curving of his lips that Sophie recognized from the night the West compound burned. "You always were too sentimental, Kieran," Silas said. His thumb hovered over the rubber injection port on the IV line. "You let a pretty face and a sob story cloud your judgment. This creature is a weakness." "He is my son," Kieran growled. He took a slow step forward, his hand on his weapon. "And if you push that plunger, I will end you." "He is a liability," Silas spat. His composure was cracking now. "Born of a weak mother and a distracted king. You spent 5 years mourning a ghost, letting the company rot while you drank yourself stupid. I did what had to be done. I burned the weakness out of you." Sophie let out a sharp cry. "You admitted it." "I did it for the company," Silas roared. His face was red now, veins standing out on his neck. "I forged the order because you were too busy playing house with an archivist to see that we were losing contracts. And now you bring a bastard heir into the fold, no." Silas jammed the needle toward the injection port. "No," Sophie screamed. She didn't think. She didn't have training or enhanced reflexes or combat experience. She had a mother's desperation. She grabbed the metal tray of surgical instruments from the side table and hurled it with every ounce of strength in her body. Scalpels and forceps and hemostats clattered through the air. One of the heavy metal kidney dishes struck Silas in the temple. It wasn't a lethal blow, but it was enough. Silas flinched. The needle missed the injection port and stabbed into the mattress instead. That split second was all Kieran needed. He crossed the room in a blur of motion. He didn't draw his weapon. There wasn't room. He hit Silas with the force of a linebacker, driving him away from the bed and into the wall. They crashed into the plaster hard enough to crack it. The vial of poison flew from Silas's hands, skittering across the linoleum floor. "Traitor!" Kieran roared. He drove his fist into Silas's ribs. The sound of bone snapping echoed in the small room. Silas was strong. He was a former Delta Force operator, but Kieran had 40 pounds on him and the fury of a father protecting his child. Silas pulled a jagged combat knife from his boot and slashed upward. Kieran twisted, but the blade caught his forearm, slicing through the expensive suit and deep into muscle. Blood, hot and metallic, sprayed onto the pristine white floor. "Kieran!" Sophie yelled. She was shielding Leo's sleeping body with her own, her arms wrapped around him. Kieran didn't even grunt. He grabbed Silas's wrist and twisted until the joint popped with a sickening crack. Silas screamed, dropping the knife. Kieran slammed Silas's head against the wall. Once, twice, 3 times. Until the man went limp, sliding down to the floor unconscious but alive. Heavy footsteps pounded down the hallway. The door burst open, filling with guards in tactical gear. Their weapons were drawn, confusion on their faces as they saw their boss bleeding and their commander slumped in a heap. "Secure him," Kieran ordered. His chest was heaving. Blood was dripping from his arm, but he didn't seem to notice. He pointed at Silas with a shaking hand. "He is under arrest for high treason and attempted murder. Take him to the detention cells. If he speaks, gag him. If he tries to resist, break his legs." The guards hesitated for a fraction of a second. Silas had been their direct commander for 15 years, but the authority in Kieran's voice was absolute. They dragged Silas out, his head lolling, a thin trail of blood marking his path. The room fell silent except for the steady beep of Leo's heart monitor. Kieran stood there, clutching his bleeding arm, staring at the empty space where his best friend had just tried to murder his son. He looked broken. Sophie slowly let go of Leo. She walked over to Kieran. She didn't hug him. She didn't scream. She reached out and placed her hand over the gash on his arm. "Sit down," she said softly, "before you fall down." Kieran looked at her. The gold in his eyes was swirling with a storm of emotions. Rage, grief, a profound, crushing guilt. "I almost let him kill my son," Kieran whispered. "I trusted him. For 20 years I trusted the man who murdered you." "He didn't murder me," Sophie said gently. She guided him to the chair Dr. Crane had vacated. "I'm right here." "I heard the order," Kieran said. His voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "I heard myself say it on the recording they played for me. Burn it all. I thought I had gone mad. I thought maybe I did it in a blackout rage." He looked at her with eyes that had seen too much. "I've lived in hell, Sophie, thinking I was the monster." Sophie grabbed bandages from the supply cart. She began to wrap his arm with movements that were efficient and practiced from years of patching, scraped knees in trailer parks. "Technology can fake a voice, Kieran," she said quietly. "But it can't fake a soul." I knew. Deep down I knew it wasn't you, but I couldn't take the risk. Not with Leo. Kieran looked at the sleeping boy, his son. Leo, he tested the name. Lion, a strong name. "He needed to be strong," Sophie said, tying off the bandage. "He didn't have a pack. He only had me." Kieran reached out with his uninjured hand. He cupped Sophie's cheek. His thumb brushed away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I will never forgive myself for the fear you lived in," he vowed. His voice was rough with emotion. "But I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel it again." The storm outside had broken, leaving behind a heavy, damp silence that blanketed the estate like a shroud. It was 3 in the morning, the hour when the world felt suspended between darkness and dawn, when exhaustion made everything feel surreal. Leo had been moved to the master suite in the family wing, a sprawling room with bulletproof windows and a security detail that would make the Secret Service jealous. He was stable now. His fever was gone. His breathing was deep and even. The transfusion had worked miracles. Sophie sat on the edge of the massive king-size bed, watching her son sleep. She had showered in the adjoining bathroom, washing away the grease of the diner and the terror of the night. She was wearing a silk robe that one of the staff had left for her. It felt too soft against her skin, too expensive, too much like a life she'd walked away from. She felt like an imposter in a palace. The door creaked open. Kieran entered, moving quietly despite his size. He had cleaned up as well. His arm was properly stitched and bandaged. He was wearing a fresh black shirt and dark trousers. He looked less like a corporate titan and more like a man who'd been through a war. He carried 2 glasses and a bottle of amber liquid. He's still sleeping, Kieran asked quietly, setting the glasses on the nightstand. Sophie nodded. Dr. Crane said he'll sleep for another 12 hours at least. His body has a lot of healing to do now that the crisis has passed. Kieran poured liquid into both glasses. He handed one to Sophie. It's apple juice. I remember you don't drink alcohol. Sophie took the glass, managing a small, tired smile. You remember that? But you didn't recognize me in the diner. Kieran winced. He sat in the leather armchair opposite the bed, looking weary in a way that had nothing to do with the late hour. I saw you, but my mind refused to accept it. To hope was too dangerous. If I believed you were alive and I was wrong, it would have broken what little sanity I had left. He took a drink. Not apple juice. Whiskey. I interrogated Silas. Sophie stiffened. And he talked. He didn't have the much choice once I made it clear that silence would be more painful than confession. Kieran stared into his glass. It wasn't just jealousy or resentment. It was a coup. He was working with outside interests. Competitors who wanted a weak CEO at Blackwood Security. Silas was supposed to keep me unstable, grieving, distracted while they moved in on our government contracts. The fire, Sophie said. The memory was rising like bile in her throat. The fire was meant to kill me. Yes, Kieran's voice was flat. You found discrepancies in the financial records. You were going through the quarterly audits 3 days before the fire. Silas knew you'd seen the shell company transactions. You were the loose end. I was going to bring the files to you that morning, Sophie recalled. The memory was surfacing through layers of trauma. I had them copied to a USB drive. I wanted to surprise you with breakfast and the evidence. A surprise, Kieran murmured. His eyes closed briefly, pain etching deep lines into his face. Instead, you spent 5 years scrubbing floors and hiding in a trailer park. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the dark grounds of his kingdom. The empire he'd built, the fortress that had failed to protect the people he loved. I am a failure, Sophie, he said to the glass. I failed to protect my woman. I failed to protect my son. I let a traitor sleep under my roof for 2 decades. You didn't know, Sophie said. It is my job to know, Kieran snapped. His voice rose before he caught himself and lowered it, glancing at the sleeping child. I am the CEO. I command 300 employees. I have security clearances that most generals would envy. I am supposed to smell betrayal before it happens. He turned to face her. I don't expect you to stay. The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade suspended over everything. Sophie frowned. What? I don't expect you to stay, Kieran repeated. His voice was devoid of emotion now, carefully neutral. You built a life away from this. You have your freedom. I have already arranged a trust fund for Leo, $50 million, enough to go anywhere, do anything. You can take him, Europe, the coast, somewhere safe. He paused. I will visit when you allow it. I will provide protection from a distance. But I will not force you to live in this place. I will not cage you again. He was giving her an out. He was offering her the one thing he thought she wanted most. Escape. Sophie looked at him, really looked at him. She saw the man beneath the armor, the scar on his temple, the gray hairs starting to show at his temples, despite him only being 43, the exhaustion in every line of his body, the way he held himself like a man waiting for the final blow. He was punishing himself, exiling himself from his own son because he didn't feel worthy. She stood up and walked across the room. She stopped inches from him, close enough to smell the cedar and gunpowder scent that clung to him like a second skin. You're an idiot, Kieran Blackwood, she said softly. Kieran blinked, genuinely startled. Excuse me? I didn't hide from you because I wanted to be free, Sophie said. She reached out and took his hand. His skin was rough and warm and scarred from 100 small battles. I hid because I loved you. If Silas knew I was alive, he would have used me to destroy you. If he knew about Leo, he would have killed him to break you completely. She interlaced her fingers with his. I scrubbed floors for 5 years. I lived on instant noodles and terror. Do you really think I did that because I liked the scenery? I don't understand, Kieran whispered. I did it to keep your legacy safe, Sophie said fiercely. I did it so that one day, when the time was right, you could meet your son. So that Leo would have a father to be proud of. So that the man I loved wouldn't be destroyed by lies. She stepped closer, pressing her body against his. And now that we're here, do you really think I'm going to take the money and run? My life is dangerous, Kieran said. His voice was rough. There are people who want what I have. People who would use you and Leo to get to me. Your life is lonely, Sophie corrected. She looked up at him. And I'm tired of being lonely, too. The spark that had been there in the diner, the spark that had existed 5 years ago before the world burned, ignited into something steady and warm. It wasn't volatile or terrifying. It was a hearth fire, something that could sustain them through the cold. I'm not going anywhere, Kieran, Sophie promised. Leo needs his father, and I think I need you too. Kieran let out a shuddering breath. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her into him, burying his face in the crook of her neck. He inhaled deeply, drinking in the scent he had thought lost to ash and lies. I will earn this, he swore into her skin. I will earn you back. Every single day. Start by making sure the rest of your security team isn't compromised, Sophie said. Despite the emotion in her voice, there was a practical edge. 5 years of survival had taught her to think tactically. Kieran actually laughed. It was a low rumble that vibrated against her chest. Already done. I had my father's old team sweep the compound while we were in the medical wing. 3 men are in custody for questioning. 2 more are under surveillance. He paused. I've also brought in Rebecca Holt, former FBI forensic accountant. She's downstairs right now going through Silas's financial records. If there's a money trail, she'll find it. Sophie raised an eyebrow. You trust her? She investigated my father 20 years ago and found him clean. She doesn't owe me anything. That makes her trustworthy. Your father, Sophie pulled back slightly. Marcus is still alive. Very much so, and very angry that I didn't tell him about Leo immediately. Kieran's expression softened slightly. He wants to meet his grandson. He's been pacing in the West Library for the past 2 hours. Sophie smiled despite everything. She remembered Marcus Blackwood, 70 years old now probably, a retired Marine colonel who'd built Blackwood security from nothing in the 1970s. Gruff and intimidating, but with a soft spot for family. Let him meet Leo in the morning, Sophie said. Right now I just want to sit here and make sure our son keeps breathing. Our son, Kieran repeated. He said it like he was tasting the words, testing their weight. I have a son. You have a son who asks about you every night, Sophie said quietly. I told him his father was a king who got lost fighting monsters. I told him that one day when it was safe, his daddy would find us. Kieran's eyes were suspiciously bright. And here I am. Here you are. They stood there in the moonlight holding each other. The silence was no longer heavy with threat. It was peaceful, healing. But peace is fragile in the world of men like Kieran Blackwood. And while the internal threat had been neutralized, Silas had mentioned something before the guards dragged him away. Outside interests, competitors, people who wanted Blackwood's security. Silas hadn't been working alone. And now that their inside man was captured, those interests would know their plan had failed. They wouldn't send another spy. They would come themselves. The morning sun hit the stone walls of the Blackwood estate, turning the gray facade into something that almost looked welcoming. Inside the master suite, the air was still thick with the scent of antiseptic and the lingering metallic smell of the medical intervention. But beneath it all, there was something new. Family. Leo sat up in the massive bed, rubbing his eyes with small fists. The IV lines were gone, replaced by neat bandages. His fever had broken completely during the night. He looked small against the mountain of pillows, but his eyes were bright and alert. Kieran was sitting in the armchair where he'd kept vigil all night. He hadn't slept. He had just watched the rise and fall of his son's chest, terrified that if he closed his eyes, the boy would vanish like smoke. Mama? Leo's voice was rough from sleep. Sophie, who had been dozing lightly at the foot of the bed, stirred instantly. I'm here, baby. Right here. Leo looked past her. His gaze landed on Kieran. He didn't shrink away or cry. The child in him recognized something fundamental before his mind could process the stranger. You gave me your blood, Leo said. It was a statement, not a question. I remember. It felt like fire. Kieran leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. He was trying to make himself smaller, less intimidating. It was necessary. Your body was fighting itself. It needed an anchor. Are you the king? Leo asked, tilting his head in that way children do when they're processing something enormous. I am a CEO. Oh, Kieran said carefully, which is like a king of a company. But before that, Leo, I am your father. The silence in the room was heavy. Pregnant with 5 years of lost time and missed bedtime stories and first words that Kieran would never hear. Sophie held her breath. Leo frowned, his small face scrunching up in concentration. Mama said my dad was lost. She said he was fighting monsters and couldn't find his way home. Kieran looked at Sophie with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and grief. She had turned his absence into a heroic odyssey instead of abandonment. I was fighting monsters, Kieran agreed. His voice was rough with emotion. But I was fighting the wrong ones, and I was lost because I didn't know where you were. Leo considered this with the blunt honesty of a 4-year-old. Are you going to send us back to the trailer? The roof leaks when it rains. Kieran stood up. The power radiating off him was immense, but he kept it carefully controlled. He walked to the bed and sat on the edge, the mattress dipping under his weight. He reached out and covered Leo's small hand with his own large scarred one. You are never going back to that trailer, Kieran vowed. His voice was firm and absolute. You are a Blackwood. This estate is your home. These woods are your playground, and anyone who wants to hurt you will have to go through me and every person who works for me. Leo looked at his mother for confirmation. Sophie nodded, tears shining in her eyes. He means it, Leo. We're home. Leo's face broke into a smile. A child's smile, uncomplicated and bright. Can I have pancakes? The tension in the room shattered. Kieran actually laughed, a genuine sound that Sophie hadn't heard in 5 years. You can have whatever you want, Kieran said. A knock came at the door. It was deliberate, respectful, not the aggressive pounding of an emergency. Enter, Kieran called. The door opened. An older man with silver hair and the bearing of a Marine stepped in. Marcus Blackwood stopped in the doorway, his eyes locked on the small boy in the bed. Marcus was 71 years old, with a ramrod posture that decades of civilian life hadn't softened. He wore khakis and a crisp button-down shirt, but he still moved like a man who could field strip a rifle in 30 seconds. Grandpa, Leo asked, tilting his head. Marcus's tough exterior cracked. His weathered face transformed, years of military discipline melting away. He crossed the room in 3 strides and knelt beside the bed, bringing himself to Leo's eye level. I've been waiting 71 years to hear that word from a great-grandson, Marcus said. His voice was thick with emotion. He reached out with a weathered hand and touched Leo's cheek with surprising gentleness. You look like your father, and your grandfather, and every Blackwood who came before you. Leo smiled, unafraid of the imposing stranger. Mama says Blackwoods are strong. The strongest, Marcus confirmed. He looked up at Kieran, and for the first time in years, his son saw approval in those steel-gray eyes. You did good, son. You brought him home. Kieran felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been wound tight for 5 years. We brought each other home, Dad. Marcus stood and turned to Sophie. And you. 5 years you kept my great-grandson safe. 5 years you protected the Blackwood legacy when we didn't even know it existed. He extended his hand. Welcome home, daughter. Sophie took his hand, and Marcus pulled her into a brief, firm hug that said more than words could. A second knock interrupted the moment. This time it was Thorne, the new head of estate security. He was in his early 30s with the efficient movements of someone who'd been doing protection work for years. Sir, Thorne said, keeping his eyes averted, respectfully. The staff has gathered in the main courtyard as you requested. They're waiting. Kieran stood up, straightening his shirt. The CEO was back. The vulnerability of the father was tucked away behind armor. How many? 243. Everyone who works on the estate, security house staff, groundskeepers, IT, everyone. Good. Kieran turned to Sophie. Are you ready? Sophie looked down at her borrowed silk robe. I don't have anything to wear. I look like I just rolled out of bed. You look like a woman who walked through fire to protect her child, Kieran said. He walked over and kissed her forehead. It was a gesture of reverence that made her knees weak. Let them see you as you are. Let them see the woman who outsmarted a traitor and hid my heir for 5 years. 10 minutes later, the balcony doors of the master suite were thrown open. The early morning sun was golden and warm, cutting through the last of the storm clouds. Below in the main courtyard, hundreds of people stood in loose formation. Men and women in security uniforms. House staff in their crisp blacks and whites. Groundskeepers in work clothes. IT specialists in casual business attire. They knew something momentous had happened. They knew Silas Crow had been dragged to the detention cells in restraints. They knew there was a woman and a child in the master suite. But they didn't know the whole truth. The atmosphere was tense, uncertain, afraid. Kieran stepped out onto the balcony first. The crowd fell silent instantly. 243 people holding their collective breath. For 5 years, Kieran's voice boomed without need for amplification. We have been rotting from the inside. We believed we were vulnerable. We believed our leadership was compromised. We believed the future of this company was uncertain. He paused. We were right, but not for the reasons we thought. He reached back. Sophie stepped forward, holding Leo's hand. The boy was wearing pajamas that were too big for him, borrowed from the estate's emergency children's wardrobe. But he stood straight, mimicking his mother's courage. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The resemblance was undeniable. Even from a distance, Leo looked like a miniature version of Kieran Blackwood. "Silas Crow betrayed us," Kieran roared. His voice carried the weight of command and fury. "He sought to sell us to competitors. He murdered 14 people in the West Compound fire. He attempted to murder my son last night." Another wave of shock rolled through the assembly. Murmurs broke out. Security personnel touched their weapons nervously. "But he failed," Kieran continued, "because while he was plotting, a mother was protecting the future of this company. While he was scheming, she was surviving." Kieran scooped Leo up into his arms, lifting him high for everyone to see. The morning sun caught the boy's dark hair, making it shine almost black. "Behold," Kieran shouted, "Leo Blackwood, my son, your future." The roar that erupted from the courtyard was primal. It wasn't polite applause or professional acknowledgement. It was genuine joy and relief. A company that had been operating under a shadow for 5 years suddenly saw sunlight. People were cheering. Some were crying. The older staff members who remembered Kieran as a young man were wiping their eyes. Gable, the head housekeeper, had both hands pressed to her heart. Leo, initially startled by the noise, looked down at the sea of people. He felt their emotion washing over him like a warm tide. He looked at his father, who was smiling. A true proud smile. "Are they happy?" Leo asked, his child's voice barely audible over the celebration. "They're relieved," Kieran said. "They have hope again." Sophie stood beside them, her hand resting on Kieran's back. She felt the connection snap into place. Solid and unbreakable. The hiding was over. The running had stopped. The shadows were gone. But as Kieran lowered Leo and pulled Sophie into his side with his free arm, his eyes scanned the horizon, north, toward Seattle, toward the corporate towers where his competitors lurked like sharks circling wounded prey. Silas had sent signals before his capture, encrypted messages to his handlers, warnings that the plan had failed, that the Blackwood heir was alive and the CEO was no longer vulnerable. Those competitors would know now. They would be planning their next move. "Let them come," Kieran whispered to Sophie, his voice low and dangerous. "I have my family, I have my son, and God help anyone who tries to take what is mine." Sophie looked at the sun rising over the forest that had once been her hiding place and was now her kingdom. She thought about the trailer park with its leaking roof, the diner with its grease trap, the 5 years of fear and poverty and constant vigilance. It was over. "Let them come," she agreed. Her voice was steady. "We survived worse." Kieran looked down at her, at this woman who had given up everything to protect his legacy, who had lived in poverty to keep his son safe, who had faced him in that diner with courage that most trained soldiers didn't possess. "We're going to be okay," he said. It was half statement, half question. "We're going to be better than okay," Sophie promised. "We're going to be a family." 48 hours can change everything. 2 days after the courtyard announcement, the Blackwood estate had transformed from a place of mourning into something that almost resembled normalcy. Leo had explored every corner of the grounds with the boundless energy of a 4-year-old who'd spent too long confined to a trailer park. Sophie had begun the delicate process of reintegrating into a world she'd fled. And Kieran had been methodically dismantling the network of corruption Silas had built over 2 decades. But normalcy was an illusion, and in the world of corporate warfare, 48 hours was enough time for enemies to regroup. Kieran sat in his office on the second floor of the estate, surrounded by 3 monitors displaying financial data, security footage, and encrypted communications. Rebecca Holt, the forensic accountant he'd brought in 2 days ago, sat across from him. She was 52, former FBI, white-collar crimes with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd spent decades following money trails through labyrinthine shell companies. "Talk to me," Kieran said, not looking up from the screen showing Silas's offshore accounts. "Sentinel Solutions," Rebecca said flatly. She pushed a printout across the desk. "Victor Harlan's company. They've been the primary recipient of the funds Silas siphoned from your operations. 47 million over 5 years filtered through shell companies in the Caymans, Luxembourg, and Singapore." Kieran's jaw tightened. "Harlan, I should have known." Victor Harlan, CEO of Sentinel Solutions. They'd come up through the private security industry together in the early 2000s. Kieran had always suspected Harlan cut corners, but he'd never had proof. "It gets worse," Rebecca continued. "Sentinel just secured 3 of your government contracts: Defense Department, Homeland Security, and a State Department protection detail. Total value $680 million over 3 years. "How?" Kieran's voice was dangerously quiet. "Those contracts had non-compete clauses. We had first right of refusal." Someone on the inside waived those rights. The authorization came from your executive office. Digital signature authenticated as yours. Rebecca tapped the document. Except you were in the medical wing saving your son when this was filed. Kieran stared at the document. The timestamp was from 36 hours ago. The signature was perfect. His digital certificate, his authorization codes, everything. Silas had access to my credentials, Kieran said. Had being the operative word. This was filed 12 hours after his arrest. Rebecca leaned forward. You have another mole, Kieran. Someone with executive-level access who's still active. The door to the office burst open without knocking. Marcus Blackwood strode in, his silver hair, still military short, his posture radiating controlled fury. At 71, he still moved like a man who could dismantle a rifle in 30 seconds. We have a problem, Marcus said without preamble. I'm aware, Kieran replied, gesturing to the documents. No, a new problem. Marcus's expression was grim. I just got a call from General Matheson at CENTCOM. Someone sent him a classified file suggesting that Blackwood security has been compromised by foreign intelligence. Russian specifically. They're recommending a complete security review and suspension of all active contracts pending investigation. Kieran stood up slowly. That's a death sentence for the company. We'd lose $200 million in active revenue. Half our contracts would default. Exactly, Marcus said. Whoever's doing this isn't trying to steal your company anymore. They're trying to destroy it. Rebecca's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. Kieran, turn on the news, Channel 7. Kieran grabbed the remote and activated the wall-mounted screen. A news anchor was mid-sentence, professional concern etched on her features. Allegations that Blackwood Security CEO Kieran Blackwood may have been aware of Russian intelligence infiltration within his company. Sources close to the Defense Department suggest that the recent arrest of COO Silas Crow may be connected to a broader espionage network. Mr. Blackwood has not yet responded to requests for comment. The screen cut to footage of the Blackwood estate clearly shot from the road outside the security perimeter. Then to Kieran's official corporate headshot. Then to file footage of Russian diplomatic officials leaving the embassy. They're framing you, Marcus said through gritted teeth. They can't buy you, they can't infiltrate you anymore, so they're destroying your reputation. Kieran's phone rang. He looked at the screen. FBI Director Chen. He answered on speaker. Kieran, Director Chen's voice was tight. I'm calling as a courtesy. I have a warrant for your arrest. Obstruction of justice. Someone leaked the Silas interrogation tapes to the media. They've been edited to make it look like you coerced a confession. That's impossible. Those tapes are secured. The metadata shows they were uploaded from your personal network 40 minutes ago. Chen's voice carried genuine regret. I'm sorry, Kieran, but I have orders. Kieran's blood ran cold. The second mole, still active, still sabotaging. I'm sending a team to your location, Chen continued. And Kieran, this time I can't help you. The evidence is too strong. You'll be arraigned within 24 hours. After that, you're looking at federal charges that could put you away for 20 years. The line went dead. Sophie appeared in the doorway, having heard the last of the conversation. Her face was pale. They're framing you. Again. And they're good at it, Marcus said grimly. If those tapes go public, it won't matter that Silas is guilty. You'll look like a vigilante CEO who tortured a confession out of a business rival. Kieran looked at the three people in the room. At Rebecca, who was already typing furiously on her laptop. At his father, whose military mind was already calculating tactical options. At Sophie, who'd already lost 5 years to running. And he thought about Leo playing in the gardens with Mrs. Gable, oblivious to the fact that his father might be taken away in handcuffs. I'm not running, Kieran said. His voice was steel. And I'm not letting them take me. We have 18 minutes before that FBI team arrives. Rebecca, how long to trace that upload? If it came from inside the estate network, I can find it in 10 minutes, maybe less. Do it. Dad, I need you to stall the FBI when they arrive. Politely, legally, but I need 20 minutes. And you? Marcus asked. Sophie and I are going to find that server Silas mentioned during interrogation. The contingency backup. If he was smart, and he kept everything. Every email, every payment, every piece of leverage he had on Harlan and Sentinel Solutions. Where is it? Sophie asked. I don't know, but you said he mentioned the lumber mill, the old one near Sutter's Creek. If we can get there before the FBI locks down our movements. That's a 90-minute round trip by helicopter, Marcus interrupted. You'll never make it back before they arrest you. Then I won't come back, Kieran said. Not until I have the evidence to clear my name. Sophie, can you navigate to that mill? Yes, but Kieran, no arguments. Rebecca, you're with us. We need your forensic expertise. Dad, you hold the fort. Keep Leo safe. If they come for him, they'll have to go through my memory. That through me, Marcus said. There was no bravado in his voice, just cold fact. 12 minutes later, Kieran, Sophie, and Rebecca were airborne in Blackwood Security's Eurocopter flying low over the Cascade forests. Through the windows, they could see the convoy of black SUVs approaching the estate from the south. The pilot, a former Army aviator named Torres, didn't ask questions. He just flew. The flight to Sutter's Creek took 38 minutes. They landed in the same clearing Kieran and Sophie had used 5 years ago when she'd first fled the burning compound. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The abandoned lumber mill looked even more decrepit in daylight, collapsed sections of roof, graffiti from teenagers. But as they approached, Kieran noticed the signs Sophie had pointed out before. Fresh tire tracks, a small diesel generator humming in what used to be the maintenance building, new padlocks on doors that should have been rusted shut. This is it, Sophie whispered. They breached the main building with tactical precision, Kieran leading with his sidearm drawn. The interior was exactly what you'd expect from an abandoned mill, rotting, wood-broken equipment, evidence of squatters and vandals. But in the basement, hidden behind a false wall that Sophie helped them locate, was a climate-controlled room housing a server rack with military-grade encryption and backup power. Bingo, Rebecca breathed. She immediately pulled out a portable terminal and began connecting to the system. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. How long? Kieran asked, watching the entrance. Depends on the security. The encryption is military spec. Could be minutes, could be wait. Rebecca's eyes widened. The system is asking for biometric authentication, fingerprint and retinal scan. Silas is in custody 3 hours away, Kieran said. We can't. Wait, Sophie interrupted. Her mind was racing back through fragmented memories. 5 years ago, when I was escaping, I saw Silas override a security door in the sub-level. He used a backup code. He said it out loud. She closed her eyes, forcing herself back to that terrible night. The smoke, the screams, Silas's face illuminated by flames as he punched in the override. Something about his daughter, Sophie said. He said if he ever had a daughter, he'd name her Elise, after his mother. Rebecca typed rapidly. Elise, E-L-I-S-E, adding numerical variants, birth date combinations, military service number. Her screen flickered. Got it. I'm in. The monitors came to life. Thousands of files, emails, financial transactions, video recordings, audio files, 5 years of meticulous documentation. My God, Rebecca whispered. This is everything. Communications with Harland, payment schedules, the entire operation laid out like a roadmap. She opened a video file. Silas appeared on screen, sitting in this very room, recording himself like a confessional. This is Contingency Protocol 7, Silas's recorded voice said. If I'm compromised before the acquisition is complete, this server will automatically transmit all evidence to my designated contacts at Sentinel Solutions and to selected media outlets. Insurance policy to ensure Harland honors his commitments. Transmission occurs automatically if I fail to input the daily authentication code for more than 48 hours. Rebecca checked the system logs. He missed yesterday's check-in because he's in your detention cells. The transmission is scheduled for, she paled, 5 hours from now. If this goes out, everything in these files becomes public, including classified information about your government contracts. If that happens, Blackwood Security won't just lose contracts, Kieran said. We'll face criminal charges for disclosure of classified information. Even though Silas created the files, Sophie asked. Doesn't matter, it's your company, your legal liability, Rebecca confirmed. Kieran's jaw set. Then we don't let it transmit. Copy what we need, destroy the rest. That's not enough, Sophie said. Everyone turned to look at her. She was staring at the screens full of damning evidence against Sentinel Solutions and Victor Harland. If we just destroy evidence, it looks like we're guilty. We need to use this, all of it. How? Kieran asked. Sophie's mind was working through the problem with the same analytical precision she'd once brought to the Blackwood archives. We don't destroy the transmission. We redirect it. Rebecca's eyes lit up with understanding. Instead of sending to Harland and the media, we send it to the FBI, to the Defense Department Inspector General, to the Senate Intelligence Committee. Sophie looked at Kieran. Let them see everything. Harland's attempted corporate espionage, Silas's treason, the money trail, the forged documents, all of it. Time-stamped, authenticated, undeniable. Rebecca was already working. I can reprogram the recipient list. The files are already packaged for transmission. I just need to change the addresses. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. Done. New transmission target FBI. Director Chendi, ODIG, and Senate Intel. It sends in 4 hours and 53 minutes. By tonight, Harlan will be under investigation and your name will be cleared, Sophie said. And the FBI warrant, Kieran asked. Will be rescinded once Chen sees this evidence, Rebecca confirmed. Harlan fabricated those interrogation tapes. Proof is in these files. By the time we land back at the estate, you'll be exonerated. They copied the critical files to encrypt his drives and left the server intact to complete its transmission. As they climbed back into the helicopter, Kieran pulled Sophie close. You just saved the company, he said. We saved each other, Sophie corrected. Again. The flight back took 35 minutes. As they approached the estate, Torres came over the radio. Sir, FBI is still on site, but they're not in arrest posture. Director Chen is waiting in your office. He looks apologetic. They landed on the rooftop helipad. Kieran, Sophie, and Rebecca descended the stairs to find Marcus waiting with a satisfied expression. Chen received a preliminary data dump 20 minutes ago, Marcus explained. Anonymous source, just enough to make him pause the arrest. He's very interested in hearing what you have to say. In Kieran's office, FBI Director Chen stood by the window. He was a man in his late 50s with gray temples and the weathered look of someone who'd spent decades in federal service. Kieran, Chen said as they entered, I owe you an apology. You were following orders, Kieran replied. Orders based on fabricated evidence. Chen held up his phone. I received files 30 minutes ago. Preliminary analysis suggests Victor Harlan and Sentinel Solutions have been running a multi-year operation to destabilize Blackwood security. If the full transmission contains what I think it does, it will, Rebecca said, handing him an encrypted drive. Everything you need, authenticated, sourced, ready for prosecution. Chen took the drive like it was made of glass. Victor Harlan is currently being detained at his office in Seattle. Sentinel Solutions Board is in emergency session, and the allegations against you have been officially recanted. He extended his hand to Kieran. I'm sorry for doubting you. Kieran shook his hand. You were doing your job. Doesn't make it right, Chen nodded to the team. You're free to go, all of you, and Kieran. Off the record, I'm glad your son is safe. After Chen left, Kieran slumped into his desk chair. The adrenaline was finally fading, leaving behind bone-deep exhaustion. It's really over, Sophie asked from the doorway. The immediate threat, yes. Kieran ran a hand through his hair. Harlan will spend the next decade fighting federal charges. Silas will never see daylight again. The moles in my company have been identified and removed. But, Sophie heard the hesitation. But there will always be threats, always be people who want what we have. That's the price of this life. Sophie crossed the room and sat on the edge of his desk. Then we pay it, together. Kieran pulled her close, resting his forehead against her stomach. I'm not the man you fell in love with 5 years ago. I'm harder now, colder, more paranoid. Good, Sophie said, running her fingers through his hair. Because I'm not the shy archivist anymore either. I'm a mother who survived 5 years on the run. I'm stronger than I look, and I'm not afraid of your world anymore. Our world, Kieran corrected, looking up at her. This is our world now, yours, mine, and Leo's. A small voice came from the office doorway. Dad, Leo stood there in grass-stained clothes, Mrs. Gable hovering protectively behind him. The boy's face was worried. Mr. Gable said bad men were here. Are they gone? Kieran stood and crossed to his son. He knelt down to eye level. They're gone, and they won't be back. I promise. You promise a lot, Leo said with 4-year-old skepticism. I do, and Blackwoods keep their promises. Kieran held out his hand. Want to see something cool? Leo took his hand. What? Your grandfather wants to teach you how to field strip a pistol. You're probably too young, but he's very insistent. Sophie laughed. Kieran, he's 4. I was 5 when Dad taught me, Kieran said with a shrug. Besides, it's just the basics. Safety, discipline, respect for the weapon. This family, Sophie muttered, but she was smiling. 3 months later, on a crisp autumn morning, Sophie Thorne became Sophie Blackwood in a private ceremony at the estate. The garden had been transformed with white chairs and strings of lights. 200 guests attended, staff, business partners, old military friends of Marcus's, and a handful of Sophie's former colleagues from her archivist days who'd been shocked to learn she was alive. Leo was the ring bearer, taking his job with utmost seriousness. He walked down the aisle with the rings on a small pillow, his tongue poking out in concentration. Marcus walked beside him, one hand on the boy's shoulder, beaming with pride. The ceremony was simple. No religious officiant, just a federal judge who owed Marcus a favor from the Marines. The vows were traditional. The kiss was not. When Kieran pulled Sophie into his arms and kissed her like a man who'd been given a second chance at life, the crowd erupted in cheers. At the reception, Marcus gave a toast that made half the guests cry and the other half laugh. He spoke of resilience and loyalty and the strength of family bonds that could survive fire and betrayal. He spoke of second chances and the courage to take them. To my son, Marcus raised his glass, who brought his family home, and to Sophie, who never stopped believing that home was worth finding. As Kieran and Sophie danced their first dance as husband and wife, Leo watched from Marcus's lap, fighting sleep despite the early hour. "Grandpa," Leo mumbled. "Yes, son, Dad says I'll be CEO one day." Marcus chuckled. "Maybe, but first you have to finish kindergarten. That's a long time away." "Not as long as you think." Marcus kissed the top of the boy's head. "But don't rush it. Being a kid is the best job you'll ever have." The music swelled. Kieran spun Sophie under his arm, and for a moment the weight of the world fell away. No threats, no enemies, no corporate warfare. Just a man and woman who'd found their way back to each other through darkness. Later, after the guests had departed and Leo had been carried to bed still wearing his tiny suit, Kieran and Sophie stood on the balcony overlooking the estate grounds. The same balcony where they'd announced Leo to the world. "It's really over?" Sophie asked, leaning against the railing. "The immediate threats, yes." Kieran wrapped his arms around her from behind. Harlan was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. Sentinel Solutions collapsed. The DOD investigation cleared us completely. We've recovered most of the lost contracts. And Silas, life without parole, 23 counts including murder, attempted murder, treason, and corporate espionage. Kieran's voice was flat. "He'll die in a supermax facility." Sophie turned in his arms. "Do you miss him?" "The man he was before him. I miss the man I thought he was. The brother I believed I had." Kieran touched her face. "But I don't miss the lie. And I have you. I have Leo. I have my father back in my life. The real family was here all along. I just couldn't see it." "And what about tomorrow?" Sophie asked. "What happens when the next threat comes?" "Then we face it," Kieran said simply. "Together. No more secrets. No more running. No more fighting alone." He pulled a small box from his pocket. Sophie frowned. "You already gave me a ring." "That was a wedding ring." He opened the box to reveal a pendant, a small, intricately carved wolf's head in platinum. "This is a Blackwood matriarch mark. It's been in the family for 4 generations. My great-grandmother wore it. My grandmother. My mother." He fastened it around her neck. "Now you." Sophie touched the pendant. It was warm against her skin. "I don't know if I'm ready for that responsibility." "You've been carrying it for 5 years," Kieran said. "You just didn't have the title. You protected the Blackwood heir. You preserved the legacy. You're more matriarch than any woman who's worn that pendant." The sound of small footsteps made them turn. Leo appeared in the doorway in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. "Bad dream?" Sophie asked. Leo shook his head. "Just wanted to make sure you were still here." Kieran scooped him up. "We're not going anywhere, ever." "Promise?" Leo asked. "Promise." Kieran looked at Sophie over their son's head. "We're home, all of us, and home is where we stay." As they walked back inside, the 3 of them together, the Blackwood estate settled into peaceful silence. The ghosts had been laid to rest. The traitors had been punished. The family had been restored, and in the detention wing in a secure cell, Silas Crow sat alone. He'd gambled everything on a coup that failed. He'd burned bridges he could never rebuild. He'd lost. But Kieran Blackwood had won, not through ruthlessness or revenge, but through something Silas had never understood: love, trust, family. The Blackwood legacy had endured not through wealth or power, but through the willingness to fight for the people who mattered most. And as the lights of the estate dimmed for the night, one thing was clear. The deception was over. The truth had won. Whatever tomorrow brought, the Blackwood family would face it together.